Welcome to this week's episode of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I'm delighted today to have with us professional speaker Steve Hughes. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here, Simone.
Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're currently doing.
Well, I will tell you this. I have a rather unexpected career that began with accepting a dare. I know, like intrigued, right? I was actually, I think it was Easter buffet with a bunch of family members, and one of my in-laws said, "Hey, Steve, I dare you to do stand-up comedy one time. Just do 5 minutes of stand-up comedy." And I was in my 30s, and I was relatively happy, but medium, a little misgivings in the advertising business. And long story short, I did 5 minutes of stand-up comedy, invited all my friends, and I don't like to brag, but those first 5 minutes on stage, I was terrible.
I thought you said you don't like to brag.
I know, I'm kidding. No, as far as I know, the only one who ever came out and just did great from the very beginning was Dave Chappelle, and everyone else pretty much, as far as I know, had to struggle and do years of work at it. But what's interesting is it just was by saying yes to that. And yes, I didn't do that well. It's most people don't their first few times, but I kept at it and kept at it just on the side, just for fun. And then the phone call that changed my life, which again led to another yes, which will be kind of a theme in what we're talking about here, is a friend of mine from high school who worked at a big law firm in Chicago. I'm in St. Louis. He said, "Hey, Steve, you've been in advertising. I guess you do a lot of presentations and you're doing stand-up on the side. Do you ever think about combining the two of those things and come up to our law firm?" And his real question was, over lunch one day, could you make all of our lawyers funny? And I was like, what? No, I can't do that. What do you really want? And he said, well, we're smart, we're good at what we do, but we're not that good at presenting or adding humor or adding kind of a human element to what we do. Can you help us do that? And I said, I can do that, which I didn't know what I was doing, but they flew me up there, paid me, I thought, very nicely, came back home, and I said to my wife, I said, hey, if I do enough of these, I think I can swing my part of the bills here. So, and then that led 6 months later, I kind of jumped out of the nest and I just quit my job with one client and started becoming a professional speaker.
That's awesome. So what did you want to be when you were growing up?
The first thing that popped in my mind, I wanted to be an architect because it just seemed so cool. And then I loved to draw, and I would even draw like buildings and spaceships and stuff. And then I found out it involved a lot of math. And that was the end of my architecture. I like the art side. So, and like others, I want to be like a firefighter, that kind of thing. But I didn't have any other aspirations. Like friends of mine, I always want to be a doctor, or, whatever. I think I was a classic person coming out of school, had no idea what I wanted to do. And really until the stand-up comedy thing that led to the speaking, if you had asked me, I would have always said I would want to do something other than what I'm doing. I want to do something other than what I have.
So how did you get to advertising?
That was kind of another suggestion from a family member that just said, hey,
I'm seeing a theme here about guidance from.
I know. Well, it's guidance, and also, and it's, I guess I didn't really know what to do. So when someone who knew me would kind of speak into that, I know you and I have chatted about having good family support, and that's true. It's so important for your career. And I think it's also having the support, but also listening. Like when someone says, hey, what about this? You don't have to do it. But I'd say if someone who knows you well suggests or offers something up, I say give it its due, because they might see something in you don't see in yourself. And so, again, I know I liked advertising better than accounting. I wasn't an accountant, but I'm just not a numbers guy in a cubicle. But each time I would go to a different advertising job, I kept thinking it will get better. It'll get better. I'll like it more. Again, it was okay. But until I found out what I really wanted to do, which was the speaking thing, I should mention very briefly, before I went into advertising, I taught high school history for a brief period of time. So again, you have me in front of a group of people teaching or training. So that's a pretty consistent thing. And I should say on the side, I do some preaching at my church. So it all kind of comes together. Me in front of some people talking is kind of my wheelhouse.
Wonderful. So if you had to put it all together, the experience from the different careers that you have had and the guidance that you have received, what would you say the key ingredients are to successfully taking charge of your career?
I would say two things. One, actually, I'm going to change it to three because I can, and you let me do that on this podcast. One is the strategic use of appropriate yes. Saying yes to things. I think too often we're quick to be our own worst critic, or that'll never work, or that's dumb, or we go negative too quickly. Now, that doesn't mean you become a doormat and say yes to everything. I think that's also a career killer. If you become you become everyone's just, oh, let's give it to Steve, he'll do it. That's no good. But appropriate use of the word yes. Number two is smart risks, like taking a risk that is not going to put you in financial ruin, but hey, I could take a step here. I could try that. Like when I did quit my job, my wife and I said, hey, we have a little bit of savings put away. If it doesn't work out and we have to dip into that a bit, then I will go back and I'll get another job somewhere. But I didn't want to be one of those people at 80 years old, assuming I lived that long, and say, boy, I would have. First of all, where's my food? But then number two, I want to say, say, I should have tried that. We look back, how often do you look back? Like right now, whatever age you are, think about what really worried you 15, 20 years ago. And is that still the same worry? Most of the times people would say, not. What you were freaked out about, whether it's in high school or college or starting out. It's like it was a big deal at the time. I don't want to minimize that. But in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't so debilitating. And then the last thing I would say, so it's say yes more often to the right things, take smart risks, appropriate risks. And the third one would be to listen. Like, again, we talked about before, when you have a friend, a colleague, a partner, a family member who speaks into you or says something, are you really open to listening to hear what they have to say? Because you never know what might occur. I would never have on my own just said, hey, I'm going to do stand-up comedy. Or, hey, I reach out to my friend, hey, you want me to come speak at your law firm? I would never have thought to do that. But when they said it to me, I'll give that a shot, see what happens.
Thank you, Steve. Thinking about the driver's seat, this show is all about the driver's seat, being in control of your career or taking ownership for your career. When did you know you were in the driver's seat for your career?
I would say it was a couple years into the speaking when I realized I could do it. And I think the reason why it worked was it was the first time in my life where what I was really good at and enjoyed doing, I could make some money at, which is fine. And it wasn't all about the money, but also there was a need for what that thing was. Like that, if all three of those circles kind of come together, that's where it all felt like, wow, I'm using my gifts like I never have for people who need something. And I can also, get a check once in a while. So that's where I feel like it all came together.
So what was going through your mind when you decided to leave your job with one client? Because most people are like, I need to keep this side hustle going for a bit longer and to see if I can really make it with that. So what was going through your mind?
Yeah, so I appreciate that question because I would not recommend doing what I did. It's one of those do as I say, not as I do. And one of the things I heard about, at least whether it's a side hustle or at least let's say in the case of speaking, like what I do, one of the markers I heard that people say you should look for is when your speaking engagements outnumber your vacation days. Like in other words, you have enough. There's no more vacation days to take, then you probably have a pretty good head of steam. And also to be smart about it, to say, if there were a way for me to have done it on the side, let's say I had a cool, like a jewelry business, right? Some other kind of thing that I could do that didn't require me to be gone from work. Like I couldn't have done any speaking. And anyone seen Steve today? I just could not show up. Whereas if I had other kind of businesses I could do on the weekends or do at night, I probably would have waited longer. I would have had a few more clients lined up. So I would say that's an individual question for people, but also don't wait till it's perfect, right? And they always say if you're waiting for the exact perfect time, you'll never do anything. So it has to be a little bit of risk involved, but that's where I go back to the smart, appropriate risks, but not going overboard.
So for these things that you talk about, saying yes, having the appropriate level of thought around risk, what resources helped you to really show up well in those
Sure.
areas?
I will be perfectly straightforward on this front. Between the time of the stand up and actually quitting, I did go and consult a career coach. And this was a specific coach who was not just a do better where you are, but a real transition, like how to figure out what you're supposed to do in life. And she gave me, not only asked a ton of good questions, probing, deep, thought-provoking questions, but she also gave me a barrage of tests. And one of the things I loved about that, and I would recommend people do as well, doesn't have to break the bank. Because you think about it, if you invest just a small amount of money, I only did like 4 or 5 sessions with this person, but it was just fantastic. It was really great. I did one test and it said, people like you, Steve, tend to do well in these careers. Now, see if you can, I can't remember them all, but see if you can see a common denominator under these. So one was school teacher, speaker, pastor, fundraiser, like just like person after person after person was all about things where someone was in front of a group of people, talking, engaging, teaching. And so I just felt like that was a nice confirmation. The other thing I did is I started to talk to people who were doing what I kind of wanted to do. So I sought out people from the main organization. So for speakers, that the main organization, maybe the organization is the National Speakers Association, also known as NSA. We like to say NSA, we're the ones who speak, not listen. And so and I would talk to people, how did you get started? What did you do? What were your barriers? What would you do differently? I heard everything from people say, do it sooner, write a book, team up with a company. Like in the beginning, I paired up with some national companies who needed trainers like me so I could get good at platform skills and speaking. And I could go into these big companies and learn the ropes and all that kind of stuff. And then as I got more successful, I was able to step away from those folks, which is fine, and do it all on my own. So that's, so I'd say seek out help, advice, get a coach briefly, find the organization of the people who do what you do, where do they hang out, and take it from there.
I love that. I did a test. I also had a coach because I spent a great deal of time in corporate America. And so I worked with a coach before I took a sabbatical to decide
Nice.
what I was doing. And one of the tests that I did was a natural aptitude test. And it's a test. It's an organization called the Johnson O'Connor Research Foundation, and it's an aptitude test that tells you what you're naturally good at. So I found it interesting that you did the assessment, and a lot of those things you were already doing.
Yeah. Oh, and one of them, by the way, was stand-up comic.
Oh my goodness. Now, was that improv you did or just straight out stand up?
Well, it was straight up stand up, but the funny thing about that, or interesting part, is I've shifted now from stand up to doing improv, which actually, even within the comedy world, I had to kind of still keep searching for and I realized I like the improv. I like the ensemble nature. I like the fact that if you and I were in a scene together, we would just kind of create it on the spot and react to each other, compared to just you and a microphone, in front of some people trying to be funny. It just all kind of, so I kept growing, even in my kind of side hustle, that kept happening. And by the way, so I'd be curious, what were some of the things that came up in the test, like you would be good at, or people like you thrive in X, Y, or Z?
No, what I remember specifically is that it had entrepreneur on there.
Nice.
And I was like, I'm not going to be an entrepreneur. I just didn't think I could make enough money as an entrepreneur. So I ignored it.
Right.
And it's funny,
wow.
Things come full circle because, I remember growing up and telling my mom I wanted to be a teacher. And she said, there's no money in that. So I put that aside and I teach today. So,
right.
you got to pay attention to things that come up, because it doesn't mean that because it's a period then that it's a forever period. And so the entrepreneurship thing came back around at a time when I was ready to say yes. But at the time I was like, yeah, no, got to find something else that's going to be more profitable for me.
What's funny about that is I remember taking a test once This is again when I was in advertising, where again, I feel like for me, advertising was just, it was paying the bills. It was fine, but it wasn't like I got all excited on Monday morning to go into work. I took a test on some website that said something like, take these 10 questions and see if you would be a good entrepreneur. And one of them was like, would you be willing to give up a vacation to work on your business? Would you be willing to give up this or do that? I remember I answered no, no, no. And I thought, okay, I'll never be an entrepreneur. But I answered those questions, Simone, as if I had to be an entrepreneur within advertising. You know, I do as if any job I'd already had. And then if I could take that same test now, I would give much different answers because I'm doing what I enjoy. I'm using my gifts. I'm kind of in my wheelhouse. I'm always getting better. I'm not there yet, but just I'm so much closer. I'm sure you are too. I can see the smile on your face and the things you're doing just sounds like you're much closer to who you are as a person, bringing value to the world.
Yeah, I really enjoy the flexibility and the ability to embrace my diversity. So to try different things to see if I like it and to stick with it. So I would say go for it if you have aspirations, listeners, of being a entrepreneur. Give it a try. And as Steve said, say yes. Which Steve reminds me of Shonda Rhimes. She has a book called The Year of Yes. I don't know if you're
Yes,
familiar with that.
I am. In fact, I wish I would have thought of that book first. It's such a genius idea. Yeah,
Yeah, so the saying yes, and I like the way you framed it, saying be strategic about your yes, because you don't have to say yes to everything. But at least in my mind, saying yes and being uncomfortable can be a good thing because it's really building skill.
absolutely. In fact, what's interesting about what you just said is, in a nutshell, the whole thing about improv, when you see someone doing improvisation or being funny, they're basically just obeying one main key principle, which is everything that happens in a scene in improv is an offer. Like if you and I are in a scene together and suddenly you had an accent as if you're from France, oh, then we're in France. That's an offer to me. And I would accept that offer and then do something back to you and you accept my offer. And so saying yes to offers and building onto them is what improv is all about. And so everything in life, if you think about it, everything in life is an offer. A traffic jam, a bad email from a client, good news from somebody else, a windfall of money or something else bad. They're all offers. And it's a matter of us to say, okay, I may not like the offer, but I'm going to accept it and I'm going to do something about it. So it actually invites you to exercise your agency. Even if you don't have much power at all, we can always control our response to a situation. So what you said just dovetails on that perfectly.
A question for you. If you had to write a book on your career body of work, what do you think the title of the book might be?
Career adventures from a bald man. No, I would probably no, I would say
Now the audience, our global audience knows that you're a boss.
yes, they might know that I'm politically challenged. No, I would say if I had to answer, I would say the title would be "Say Yes More Often." So again, just like the year of saying yes or whatever, I forgot the title, but it's like the idea of, I think when you do say yes, it just invites opportunity. The thing about yes is it entertains possibility and upside and avenues you may never have explored before. We're not doormats. We don't say yes to everything, but the spirit is, I like to say yes to as much as I can within reason, and to see where things happen. And that's been, had I said no at any one of those stages along the way, I wouldn't be here. I would have kind of cut short the avenues in front of me.
From a career standpoint, tell our listeners what are some of the things they should think about when deciding to say yes? You're presented with an opportunity, you want to say yes. What should you think about before you say yes?
Well, first of all, I would say let your default be, in general, whether you say it verbally or just mentally, okay, this came into me, before you instantly throw it out and say it's not a good idea or it's terrible, it's not a good time. Someone may have seen something in you to even serve up the idea. Again, back to the person saying, hey, you ought to do stand-up comedy. They wouldn't have said that if they didn't think I was funny, right? Or my friend would have called me if he didn't think I could probably do a good job. Now, am I 10 times better than I was before? Absolutely. So when someone asks you something, I would say that the first thought is is this doable? I mean, could this really happen? What do they see in me that might be something I'm not seeing in myself? There'll never be a perfect time, but could this be a good time? Could this be something I could do? And yes, if it is uncomfortable, I was thinking that there's two kinds of discomfort. And I will say, I don't work out a lot, but I do know where the gym is in my local neighborhood.
Me too.
I saw it. Well, I drive by it a lot. No, but I remember I went and got training once on weight training, just to say, hey, don't, do these things and you'll succeed. And they said there's two kinds of pain, at least when it comes to lifting weights. There's the one kind of pain where it's like, oh my goodness, I worked out a lot today and my muscles just kind of ache and they're sore, and I really went to that's pain. That's kind of tough. For you're doing 10 reps of something and you get to number 8 and oh my gosh, I want to stop now. Okay, I can do 9, I can do 10. Like, that's pain. That's good pain. That's a good pain you should lean into. The bad pain is you grab the 300-pound barbell and you think you're still in high school, and then you hear something snap, or like, oh my goodness, or it's just you're way overdoing it. That's bad pain. And so your body tells you, but I think too often we loop all that pain into one big category. So anything that makes us uncomfortable, or gives us a moment of disquiet, or it makes us feel slightly uneasy, sometimes that's a good thing, and please listen to it and honor it. But other times, don't let that be your default. Oh, that makes me feel uncomfortable, I'll never do that. So when I work with a lot of people on how to be better speakers, that's one of the things I talk about, is so often people don't like speaking, so they avoid speaking. So when it comes up, it's a much bigger deal. It becomes just insurmountable in their mind. Whereas if you say, yes, okay, stand up at that PTA meeting and say something, or your condo or your neighborhood association, or find a way to stand up and say something at a weekly meeting at work where you wouldn't have otherwise. And that's the good kind of pain to lean into. So it's just recognizing that our initial answer for most of the time is to say no, to shut down. But to just think of it as someone comes over for coffee, or they come over unexpectedly, and oh my gosh, it's no good time, my house is a mess, get out of here. No, come on in, have a cup of coffee, forgive the clothes over in the corner. Let's just entertain the idea for a second. That's kind of the yes idea. Now, it may lead to something great, it may not, but just be aware of how often you're saying no, like just instantly shutting something down before it even has a chance to put on its pants and come on over and introduce itself to you.
I love that. I love that. Say yes more often. I love the idea of the check your default.
Right.
Because we could have noise going on in our head to say, yeah, that's, here are all the reasons why it won't happen. But to check that, or reframe the default to check that.
Exactly. And there's room. In fact, one of the things with improv, again, we'll talk about, it doesn't say don't ever have good internal judgment, but it says suspend it for just a second. Just let the judgment can come in and do its thing, and it might shut down and say it really was a bad idea, don't do that. But if you do that too quickly, then you cut off the idea before it has a chance to do anything. So it's a suspension of judgment for just a bit. And you reminded me of a I forgot, where you located again?
I'm in Connecticut.
Oh, very nice. Okay. So I had an internship once in Houston and spent some time in Texas. And I heard about a study that from the University of Texas that said 70%, 70% of our self-talk, our internal monologue, is negative. So we are often our number one worst enemy. We're the ones who are cutting ourselves down and undercutting our resolve. And you're not smart enough. You're an imposter. That's stupid. No one's going to like you. This will never work. So talk about, sometimes your first yes has to be to yourself. So
that's going to be the title of your episode. Say yes to yourself. I love that.
There you go. See, look at that. Ding, it worked out. And I'm glad you didn't judge that answer.
Could be the book title.
Yeah. Okay, I'm writing that down. Thank you. This is ding, ding, ding. I love it.
I'll look for the book.
That's
Say
perfect.
Yes to yourself.
That's good. That's very good.
Yeah. Steve, you have me thinking about improv. I'm scared of improv, although I did go to Toastmasters, but
good for you.
You've got me thinking more about improv again, and just saying yes to that, because I have been nervous about, what if I panic and I don't know what to say?
Well, okay, and let me tell you, one of the most that's first of all perfectly natural. One of the most freeing things I'd ever heard was in one of my first ever classes I did in improv. Was the instructor got out there and basically said, for the next hour and a half, how long our class was, he said, think about it this way. You cannot make a mistake. Like, it is impossible for you in anything you do today for the next hour and a half to make a mistake. He said, basically, how does that make people feel? And we all went, pretty awesome. Like he said, so literally in your scene, if you can do nothing but stand there silently, or you just burp, or you make monosyllabic grunts or something, that's fine. You can't mess up. And then once he said, you can't mess up, he then coupled that idea with, how often in life do we have this, I've got to be perfect. I can't make a mistake. I can't make one little, and again, you don't seek to make the mistake, but when they do happen, if you then say, okay, you know what, that's an offer, right? I didn't mean to send reply all to everybody, or whatever thing you might have done poorly. Okay, great. That too is an offer. That was a mistake. I didn't want that to happen, but what can now happen because of it? And I won't go into the details now, but some of the greatest food you've ever tasted in your life all came from mistakes, from Toll House cookies to the invention of nachos to, potato chips. I mean, it's amazing how those foods, which are so delicious and yummy, were not intended to be how they were. And had the person not kept going with it, we would never have those delicious treats, So just know that and when a mistake happens, that's an offer. Say it happened, deal with it, but then what can you now do going forward to improve it? And that can be very freeing. I would love to have more people go do improv, because it is just, once you understand the principles behind it, and you're not trying to be funny, you're just trying to just explore an idea, and it can be some of our best scenes we ever do are when the instructor will say, try not to be funny. Like, literally don't be funny. Do not try to make people laugh. And then people are much more genuine. And sometimes from that comes really good humor, even though that's not the goal. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of, I'd love everyone to do improv if they could.
All right. Well, listeners, take note and, stay tuned to the show notes in our LinkedIn group, because I may do some improv and share in the LinkedIn group. All right, Steve, can you tell our listeners how to stay connected with you if they'd like to do so?
Absolutely. So my website is hityourstride.com, just like the running term, hityourstride.com. And you can also find me on LinkedIn, certainly Steve Hughes, and just look for the bald guy. And then I did in my first book I wrote, you can find on Amazon, it's called Captivate. And it's all about making presentations that inspire and engage. So it's the idea of how can you, just with your voice, wherever you are, just a small group, a large group, how can you bring the best of what you have to the table to get people to lean in, care, and actually make a change? And well, first of all, I think it's a wonderful book. I wrote it, but it was a labor of love to put it together.
Love that. Thank you so much, Steve, for being on the podcast and for sharing your humor and your wisdom. Any parting words for our audience around owning your career?
I would just reiterate and say yes more often and see what happens.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show, Steve. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Power of Owning Your Career podcast.
Thanks so much, Simone. Great to be here.